Hallo Deutschlerner! I had my mind blown the other day by Veritasium, the science YouTube channel that teaches everything from physics to environmental science and everything in between in a way that pretty much anybody can understand. This video wasn't about the typical sciencey type stuff, however. It was about what it takes to become an expert. The thing that blew my mind wasn't the 4 things that he listed that make someone into an expert. It was simply that I had naturally observed these things as I learned German myself, and I saw my own German skills progress. I've been trying to find a way to articulate exactly what it is that he said in that video for years now, but never had exactly the right way to say it. When he summarized it all, it was so perfect that I had to make my own video about this, even though his video is over a year old. In today's video, I want to break down what Derek from Veritasium said about becoming an expert and how you can apply this knowledge to becoming an expert in the German language. Derek starts his video by asking what makes experts special. Are they just smarter than everyone else? Do they know tricks and tips that other people don't? Can they recognize patterns that others can't? The answer is actually kind of surprising. Chess masters are experts at recognizing patterns of board configurations. In other words, how the pieces are placed on a board at any given point in the game. They can recognize these configurations because they have been exposed to an enormous amount of games and how the games progressed. They use this information to chunk up all of the information together. Rather than seeing individual pieces on the board, they see the overall layout of the board and how it compares to other configurations that they've encountered. There's this old idea that you need 10,000 hours of practice at something in order to become an expert at it. But it isn't enough to simply practice. If you practice the same phrase over and over again in German for 10,000 hours, you definitely won't forget that one phrase, but you also won't be an expert in German. You would be a doofus who spent 10,000 hours learning one phrase. So the first ingredient that you need to incorporate into your German learning in order to become an expert is repeated attempts with feedback. The example that Derek gave in his video is that there were experts in political science and commenting on politics that were asked to make predictions about what would happen in a variety of real-world situations. Then they waited until they saw what actually happened in those events. The results were actually hilariously bad for the experts, because the situations were one-off kind of things, meaning that they weren't events that were the same as previous versions. The experts were not able to predict what would happen because they had not seen this kind of thing before. So what does this mean for your German learning? This goes back to the thing I said earlier. If you spend 10,000 hours learning German, but you don't vary the topics or change up what part of the language you're practicing, you will never be an expert, as you will only know the parts that you practice. If you spend the next 5 years studying the A1 level of German conversation, you will never be fluent in German, and you will just never be an expert. You'll be the most phenomenal interviewer who ever lived, so long as the interview never gets past, who are you, where do you live, and what do you like to do? Variety is key to becoming an expert. The second ingredient is a valid environment. This is a set of variables in what you are learning that at least have some sort of predictability. You know that when you use this preposition, this is the word that follows. When I use the preposition mit in German, I almost always instinctively add dem after it. This isn't always what I actually need, as sometimes the noun that follows is feminine, so I should use der instead, but this is the pattern that has shown up so much that it's been ingrained into my brain. I will often say mit dem, or mit dem, in a sentence and then have to go back and correct myself before continuing on to the rest of the sentence because I just assumed it was mit dem because mit is always followed by dem. For example, ich fahre mit der S-Bahn. If you're going by bus, train, car, or pretty much any other mode of transportation, you would use dem. Mit dem Bus, mit dem Zug, mit dem Auto. But because S-Bahn is feminine, I had to use der. I've used mit dem so often in conversation, however, that this is what my mind automatically predicts should come after the preposition mit, even when it's incorrect. You need to expose yourself to enough German language that you can recognize these kinds of patterns. One of the reasons that I teach so many German grammar lessons on this channel is because you can start to recognize the patterns more easily if you know what patterns you're looking for. You don't need to know the difference between perfect tense and Präteritum tense, but you should be able to recognize that people use GE in front of a verb a lot when talking about the past, but books that you read use TE endings at the end of verbs instead. You don't need to know the word conjugation, but you should recognize that there is a pattern that most of the time the subject ich is followed by the verb that ends with an E. If someone points out these patterns to you at first, you will be much quicker to recognize and internalize them when you're speaking German. The next ingredient is timely feedback. This means that you learn whether or not what you said or wrote was correct. This can be super formal, like whenever you take a test in German class and your teacher comes in and marks a bunch of stuff with a red pen, or it can be super informal, like whenever you say something in German and a German person just kind of looks at you and goes, "Huh?" Both of them tell you that you did something wrong. Unfortunately, for the usual way that formal education works, at least in high schools here in the US, is that feedback is not always timely. It sometimes takes me a week or two to grade chapter tests. By then, the students have already forgotten what they wrote down and why they wrote it, so the feedback that they get is mostly useless to them. If this is the case, the immediate feedback of the person saying, "Huh?" is much better for you than the feedback from your actual German teacher because your teacher is slow. If, however, the test is immediately graded by a computer program and the students can then see their answers compared to the answer key, the feedback is immediate and therefore the learners can find their errors and adjust for the future. This also works great for oral presentations in German class. I give my students a rubric that they will be graded on. Then they give a presentation, and I give them immediate feedback both orally and on paper. This feedback loop is pivotal to learning anything, but when it comes to language learning, it is imperative. If you don't get any feedback at any point, you'll end up internalizing a bunch of errors, and then whenever you go to Germany, the only response you're ever going to get from a German person will be, "Huh?" The ingredient that I consider to be the most important when becoming an expert in something is also the one that my students hate the most. It is deliberate practice. Said another way, it is not being comfortable with your current status. I have students every year who try to use the adjective gut for everything that they ever say in class. They learn one adjective at the very beginning of German 1 and never try to expand their vocabulary beyond that. If they choose a different adjective, they could be wrong. That would be uncomfortable. And then they would just never do that ever again. Generally speaking, my students hate giving presentations. They hate it even more whenever I tell them that they can't use any notes. They don't want to step outside of their comfort zone. Sitting at a desk answering 1 or 2 questions at a time is super easy, but speaking German for 2 minutes straight about your house without any notes is kind of difficult. If you don't do these uncomfortable things, however, you will never become an expert. The biggest improvements that I saw in my own German learning was whenever I started going to the university's Stammtisch events at the local coffee shop. Every Friday, we would meet there for about an hour or more, and we would just speak German to each other. I don't consider myself to be a very social person. If I can avoid social interactions, I definitely will, but when you're learning a language, you have to hear the language, you have to speak the language, and you have to be able to respond to impromptu stimuli on the fly in a language. So Stammtisch is all of that wrapped up into a nice, neat bow. Like these. I learned political vocabulary, construction vocabulary, vocabulary about art, music, gardening, and a whole lot more just by showing up to a Stammtisch once a week, going out of my comfort zone and speaking German with some other people. In the Veritasium video, Derek makes the analogy of lifting weights and working out. The most growth that you will ever see will be in the last few reps before you quit. It's also when you feel the burn, when you almost can't do it anymore. That's when your muscles get bigger, your speed will increase, your endurance will increase. All of the things that you're working towards get better when you struggle. The exact same thing is true in German learning. If you don't push yourself, you will stay exactly where you are. If you don't stumble, you'll never learn how to balance. If you don't make grammar errors, you won't be able to fix them. You have to do stuff in order to improve that stuff. This is why I've said in previous videos and YouTube comments when someone asks me, how do I get better at speaking German? Speak more German. How do I get better at listening to Germans when they speak so fast? Listen to more Germans. How do I get better at writing? Write more in German. It's the same reason that my students who Google translated their way through German class can't pass a test, answer any questions in class, or speak the language at all. They never exercise the muscles in their brain necessary to do these things. This is why I've been putting a huge emphasis on all of the classes that I teach in person with this idea of practice. It's there for you to figure out, do you get it or do you not? If you don't, the feedback will tell you so. It will tell you what you got wrong and how to fix it so that you can do better the next time. It is not a punishment. The only thing that is hurt in this process is your ego, and it needs to get out of the way before you can learn a language. All of this boils down to deliberate practice. It's the idea of purposefully putting yourself at the edge of your comfort zone in the language and leaning forward, maybe even taking a step forward. Keep pushing forward until you reach your goals, and then keep pushing. This brings me to one more thing to add. Language learning is not a thing where you hit a milestone and you've won. I'm still learning German. After 3 years of high school lessons, 4 years of university classes, many trips to Germany, and 15 years of teaching German to high school students, I'm still learning. The trick is to push myself forward to hone the skills that I have. I am not perfect when speaking or writing in German. I probably never will be perfect in this regard. I can't spell perfectly in English, and I've been speaking that since I was 1 year old. The idea isn't to be perfect, but rather to keep pushing the needle forward. So what am I currently doing to improve my German skills? First of all, I'm enrolled in an online master's program which requires me to read a ton of complex stuff in German about linguistics and a whole host of other topics. Secondly, I've started making it a point to watch at least 20 to 30 minutes of videos on YouTube in German every day. Normally I'll just listen to the news in the morning whenever I'm watching YouTube videos, but now I incorporate German news into that as well. Thirdly, I've started a rotation of reading books on a variety of different topics. I mentioned in previous videos that I recently read All Quiet on the Western Front in German. After that, I read a book about marketing and advertising. Now I'm reading a book that's just for fun. My next book will be a German book. Then another one to help me improve either my YouTube channel or myself. Then back to a fun book. This rotation is actually something that I set up so that I can improve on multiple fronts. The German books are for my German skills. The marketing and other self-improvement books are to improve my YouTube channel. And the last category is so that I don't become a dull boy like Jack, with all work and no play. When you want to become an expert in something, you need a ton of practice. The number that is always thrown out is 10,000 hours of practice. Practice on its own, however, is not enough. You need lots of repetition, pattern recognition, timely feedback, and deliberate practice. So what are you doing to make sure that your German learning includes all of these ingredients? Write it down in the comments below. If you want to watch Veritasium's video about the ingredients for becoming an expert, click over here. If you want to become an expert in the German language by learning with my lessons, click over here for my Deutschlerner Club. Das ist alles für heute. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss!